We're filming today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive. We're attending the LA Classic Jazz Fest, and it's our pleasure to have with us Marty Grosz, who is an acoustic guitarist and purveyor of a special form of jazz, I think, that we're going to try to get a handle on here. And thanks for your time in joining us today. I want to start out and ask you about, and you have to excuse my accent, okay? But what is this statement here? Do you mean you want to sit in one of those swing orchestras and do ching, ching, ching all night?
Yes, that was my mother, who was very, very happy. I had sort of learned secretly, because I don't know, when you really care about something, and I really cared. I'm not one of those guys who had an instrument thrust in his hand, although I did have a ukulele thrust in my hand when I was about 8 years old. Mm-hmm. We had lessons at school, but it didn't work. We all of us sat around in 20 kids in one room, people banging on drums, pianos, all that stuff, trombones, and what are you going to do with a uke? Nothing. That's the only instrument we had at home. I think my mother actually wanted to have a piano, but we were in a rented house. And I think my father, I don't know if this is true, but he might have thought that the piano was too much of a symbol of some kind of bourgeois respectability.
And we wouldn't want that.
No,
no kidding.
I mean, I'm assuming that. I don't. I know. Yeah. So I think that on the scale of things important to spend money on at a time when money was not that available, I think he probably would have thought, he remembered from his youth in Germany, every house had what they called the gute Stube, the good room where they never, like the living room that was never used.
Don't sit there.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the piano was often this sacred symbol with a piano scarf on it, and don't put this on it, don't put that. That's the piano. Don't touch that. That's the piano. I'll dust the piano. And so forth and so on. And maybe that's what he thought. I don't know. So anyway, I sort of got a guitar. I saved up my money with doing errands and allowance and jobs and things like that. And I went to New York and got like a $20 guitar. Terrible thing. I didn't know any better. But I kept fiddling with it at home. And I was so embarrassed, kind of, that I was so lousy. I tried to play along with records. Lionel Hampton, I remember, was one of the ones. Rhythm by Lionel Hampton, and with Johnny Hodges and Alan Roos was on it, and Cozy Cole and Jess Stacy and I'd last about half a chorus before the muscles would give out. And so anyway, one night a friend of ours came over and he brought a little concertina along, and we went up to my room. And there was a dinner party. It was a party, about 20, 30 people. And we went up and sequestered ourselves and worked out, I never forget the songs, Blue Skies and Old Man River. And we came down and gave them a little musicale. And my father, who was half in the bag, I think the cigar probably almost fell out of his mouth. And my mother was beaming with pride. That's my boy. You see, he taught himself all this himself. And
He's singing too?
No.
Okay,
no, not that
instrumental.
Time. Just instrumental, yeah. And from then on, I could do no wrong. Oh, it's wonderful. You should get a better instrument. And they were all behind it until, of course, that moment when you pass beyond. It's for fun and it's for high school or school and stuff, and you become very serious about it. And in middle-class families, what was middle class then, now the whole definition is topsy-turvy, it seems, but that, and my mother, of course, being German, had this German accent, and that's when she said, one day she said, you mean you want to sit in front of those swing bands and go ching, ching, ching? And I said, yeah, Ma, that's it.
You've had it.
That's it. I thought immediately, these things always seem to happen with the onset of puberty. They're very much glandular in nature. I saw myself like the bands I went to see at the Paramount and the Strand and the Capitol Theaters in Manhattan. I saw myself, well, mustache, it'd be good. Hair, a lot of goo on the hair, slicked, shiny, wearing one of those mess jackets,
What's a mess
mess
jacket?
jacket is a jacket, you know, that like the British officers wear when they formal wear. You wear them with, they wore them with striped tuxedo pants, and then the jacket was usually white. It was a summer jacket, and it only came down to here. And then you wore your miniature medals there if you were in the British. But of course, the musicians had those too,
Yeah.
you know. And I thought, oh man, to play in one of those bands, wow, you know. And I mean, that was a great ambition in those days, you know. It was
Almost like today, what a kid thinks of being in a heavy-duty, you know, famous rock and roll band. I mean, is that a fair statement? That this was?
Yes. Except there was a difference. I think we knew. It didn't take long before you knew that a lot of hard work was ahead of you before you even could knock on the door.
Okay.
I think, because although we fantasized and posed in front of the mirror with our instruments, guys with their clarinets and trumpets and everything like that, when you actually went to see one of these bands, you had some youthful arrogance. Well, I'll get there. But it soon became apparent that it wasn't all that easy. You know, first of all, in those days, all bands, not all bands, but most of the bands read. You had to read. And most of the dance orchestrations, I mean, that's what mostly what music was for. Starting off with high school dances,
Right.
and then, you know, into theaters and stuff, and all these guys had their nose in the paper. And the first time I remember is looking at one of those stock arrangements of Stomping at the Savoy, I thought, well, this is you know, hieroglyphics. You need the Rosetta Stone to decipher this. What in the hell is a D flat ninth? You know, what is that? And what is a G flat minor sixth and all that stuff? You know.
Had the slashes in the chord.
Yeah. The guitar parts were mostly rhythm parts in those days. You know.
Up until that time, you had been teaching yourself.
Yes. I never did have a teacher,
Okay.
except for some guys musicians who would show me things, you know.
But when you were playing along with a record or something, and you would go and you'd find the right chord,
Yeah.
did you have a name for it?
Yeah, I got a book,
Okay.
and it had the little dots and the boxes on it.
All right.
And pretty soon I got to be, you know, and then I would always hang out with piano players, because the piano players were the theoreticians in the band. They'd all the guys, I mean, who played piano usually had 3 or 4 years of music behind them. They could read. They could teach you the song. They would say, listen, when you get there, play an A minor 7th flat 5. I said, what's that? Well, just it's like a C minor 6, but the A is in the, don't worry about it. I'll play the A in the bass.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And they would sort of bring you up and start saying, no, that's not right. Play this one, or play that one, or try this here. I remember the first time a friend of mine showed me some hip changes to Peg of My Heart. Oh, I was really, I couldn't get enough of the song. Let's play Peg of My Heart, you know, let's play it again.
Yeah,
you know?
'cause I got this cool thing here.
Yeah, and
Yeah, it's a whole new tune when you start.
when you start
reharmonizing.
putting in diminished chords in the middle and all kinds of stuff, you know, reharmonizing it and so forth, and I'm actually a product of a guy who heard records, and heard some bands, saw some bands, and wanted to play, as opposed to the other kind of guy who, like the piano players who had started playing, or violin kids who play on violin, they play violin for 2 or 3 years and stuff, and all of a sudden they discover jazz. Or somebody says, you know, you can make some money playing jazz.
Right.
I was one of those kids who, about 12 years of age, wanted to play jazz. And
Right
I
on the ground level.
I remember my first jazz record I ever bought for myself was a Commodore record called Paging the Devil, and I think Way Down Yonder in New Orleans was on the other side, if I'm not mistaken, by Lester Young, Buck Clayton, the Kansas City Six, I think it was.
Was Basie
Eddie
on there?
Durham, no, that was without Basie. It was Eddie Durham on electric guitar, Freddie Green, Walter Page, Joe Jones, the Basie rhythm section without Basie, for contractual reasons,
Yes.
obviously.
Yeah.
And then Buck Clayton and Lester Young. And the only reason, I didn't know any of these guys, the only reason I bought the record was because the title, you know, hadn't heard it, and I said, Paging the Devil. Wow, that sounds real evil and funky and stuff. And it turned out it was because it was Walter Page playing the blues, and he had a band called the Blue Devils, you know, so that's how that all, as you well know, doing your bassy stuff, you know.
Well, if that was your first record, then you had a
That
good
first
introduction
record,
to-
not that I heard, but that I actually bought for myself.
Yeah. Well, you had a good thing to listen to with Freddie Green then.
I went to see bands. I listened to everything. Phil Spitali and his all-girl orchestra, Charlie Spivak, Glenn Gray and the Casa Loma Orchestra, Duke Ellington, Bobby Sherwood, a wonderful guitar player that nobody knows about, that he was a fine guitar player, sort of buried in the studios. But at this occasion, he played some very good guitar, but basically he was a trumpet player with the band. That was it. He played all the instruments.
Yeah.
Anything, I'd go to see anything just to see how they did it. I didn't care. Of course, Ellington's band, because I'd read a little bit about it and heard a little bit, and heard some records, you know, that was a particular thrill, and they were certainly wonderful.
Yeah.
You know, and Benny Goodman I remember with Mike Bryan on guitar and Slam Stewart, those things. But I would go see anything, just to see how the guys did it.
Right.
When did they play? When didn't they play? Why did they do this? Why did they do that? You know, that kind of thing. Just to see how they all sat, what kind of guitars they were playing. You know. You know.
And was there at this time? What years was this?
This would be during the war, 1944, 45, 46, right after that. You know.
So the idea of amplification for the guitar, I know Freddie Green was never really amplified, right? He just kind of...
Not that I know of. I think once he went...
basically feel that sound.
He once went out, they got him a mic and an amp or something, but it was never used. And later on I heard that you know, when Bobby Hackett played with Glenn Miller, Glenn Miller had him schlep... Bobby didn't have to carry it, the band boy had to carry an amp around all the place, but Bobby never used it. He didn't like it.
Yeah.
And no, of course we heard Oscar Moore. That was a hot ticket then. The King Cole Trio was the hot ticket, and we all had those. You know, all the kids had those records, and we listened to them. And of course, we knew about this Benny Goodman Sextet with Charlie Christian. All the guys had that, and they were on Columbia, I think, yeah. And I can remember the labels, you know.
Right.
And stuff, but somehow, that never got to me. It's like I love Django Reinhardt. I had for one part of my youth, I had every Django Reinhardt I could get my hands on. But I never, for some reason, it never occurred to me that I wanted to do that. And later on, funny, I had so many friends who were really into Django. One guy in Cleveland, he said, I used to tie my fingers, put rubber bands around my fingers to try to ape Django's two-finger, you know, typewriter, two-finger typing technique that he played with. And I mean, guys, I know several of them are Django freaks. They can play everything, you know, by Django. They live Django. They think Django. In fact, and of course, later on, I found that Paris and in Europe, there are hundreds of them that do Django. They, you know, in varying degrees of success. But for some reason, I don't think I ever felt. First of all, for some damn reason that I can't understand, I wanted to be a rhythm guitar player at first, and in fact managed to be just that. And set as my idols those guys like Alan Roos and Mike Bryan and Eddie Condon and Freddie Green and whoever else I could think of. You know, no, those guys and trumpet players and horn players would tell me, those are the guys. They would say, those are the guys. They don't show off. You don't need to take choruses and stuff like that, but they play for the band. That's a team thing. And of course, in a sense, they were absolutely right, because there is a symbiosis that happens between rhythm players. When they get tight and when it really starts to work, that you can't get as a soloist, really, and at least I've never been able to. It doesn't feel quite the same. It's a special feeling. And a friend of mine called me up just 4 days ago. He's a amateur guitarist and a collector in Texas, and he called me up and he said he'd been playing electric guitar all his life, and he said he had a teacher, and there's this Texas, he signed up for a course. They have a 23-piece big band, and you sign up for a course. You pay money and you work in the big band. They do Basie and Glenn Miller and stuff like that. And he said, I really had to play rhythm guitar. And my teacher said, you know, it'll hurt for a while, but you'll get over, it'll get to a next plateau, and you'll play, even though it hurts, you'll play, and then all of a sudden you'll find out it doesn't hurt anymore. I guess it's like anything physical, jogging or lifting weights or something like that. Similar to that, you know, you have to use a higher action and heavier gauge strings. But once you get it going, you know, he said it was a wonderful feeling. I was with the bass and the drums, and we were all, you know, we're all tight together, and we got a blend and stuff like that. So. But getting back to your question, so that's what I really wanted to do. And it was, if I did take some crappy solos once in a while, that came later. That came because as the music business got worse and worse, I mean less and less employment, and groups got smaller and smaller, they wanted somebody who could do something. Hence, I also started to do the vocals. I remember I was in Chicago about 1954, 55 or something like that. Some guys, I was always hanging around. We were always sitting in the back room during the intermissions, you know, and I'd be singing little songs and playing. He says, do that on stage. He says, we need all the help we can get. And I said, oh, you know, I was like totally, totally inhibited about it. And I got up and sort of mumbled and didn't look at the audience and everything the way you do. But you know, it's like public speaking or something. Gradually, they shove you out there enough times, you know, you get used to it. That's how that came about. But basically, my favorite thing still is to just play in a rhythm section. They don't give me a solo all night. I don't give a damn. You know, I don't really care.
That feeling that a good rhythm section with a piano, guitar, and bass and drums, it's hard to define when it's really happening. But as you said, it's a special feeling.
Well, I'm writing a book, believe it or not, a monograph on rhythm guitar. History of sort of, somebody asked me to do it, and by the time I get finished with it, I'll have made a penny a page or something, because it's a labor of love. And in it, I try to describe, first of all, to tackle those problems, the questions that nobody can, the terms that nobody can really define. What is swing, you know, and I describe it, it's more one of those qualities, it's like if you ask somebody, what is a feeling of well-being? Well, nobody can really, it's very hard to find. You notice it first most, I suppose, by its absence. When things are wrong, when you feel sickly or ill, you know, you don't really, but you don't usually get up in the morning and say, gosh, I feel great today. I have a feeling of well-being. You know, you know. The same thing. You know, it's good playing with good time, articulating the time properly, and eventually getting into swinging is something that you know, you don't usually say, well, gee, we're playing with good time. Gosh, we're really swinging. It should just come naturally. And I usually tell the musicians, you know, I say to them, look, I often say to them, don't swing, don't cook, don't saute, don't do anything, don't you know, don't braise, nothing. I say, just play the song. Play the song with a good tone, the right changes, a nice beat, and if it's going to happen, it's like making love, you know. You can't bang the door down and seize the girl and throw her on the woman, throw her on the bed, and this is it. You gotta have a little din din. You gotta have a little drinky poo. You gotta look at the moon. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? You gotta have a little chance to get acquainted. It's like that. And same thing with music. Some of these jazz guys, you know, they come loaded. Like, we're going to swing, we're going to cook tonight. Bakadoon, 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 ding dong dong dong. I mean, what's going to happen? It's rather unnatural to me.
Yeah, and where's it going to go from there?
If natural is, you know, just play. If it's going to get there, it'll get there. If it isn't, all the histrionics and all the effort and all the, you know, straining isn't going to make it happen. And I've seen that happen so many times. Guys are strained. They're going to tell their story, but it doesn't work. You know, and what that mystic, of course, what that magic ingredient is, what that compatibility is that brings this out is hard to say.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anybody's ever gotten to a definition, and probably they shouldn't.
When we're talking definitions, you know,
Yeah.
when I look at your CDs and the kind of music you do, is there a way you can describe trad jazz and hot? When you used the word hot, you know,
Yes.
Was hot, did that mean jazz too?
Yes, hot
Okay.
jazz,
Yeah.
as opposed to cool jazz. I think it's just a physical thing. I mean, certain people like to live in Spain. Certain people like to live in Vermont. I mean, people make a lot of this. There's room for all of them. I happen to have been weaned early on, not only on Louis Armstrong and Bix Beiderbecke and Bessie Smith and Duke Ellington. Of course, when I was just 13 and 14, it was wonderful in New York, particularly because we had disc jockeys, jazz disc jockeys, who were very Catholic in their tastes. I use the word not in the religious sense, the other sense. I mean, you'd hear Errol Garner's first recording, a White Rose Bounce or one of those things, and the next tune would be Jack Bland and his Rhythm Makers, and the next tune would be a Duke Ellington's Main Stem, and the next tune might be Bessie Smith. So you had this whole mishmash, and I never, you know, and a Benny Goodman sextet thing, followed by by Lester Young with Johnny Guarneri and Slam Stewart and Sid Catlett, followed by Bix Beiderbecke and his gang. I mean, it was like that, and so it was only later on that separation came. That came during the bebop era through the efforts of guys like Leonard Feather and stuff to somehow, you know, call the old stuff as crappy. And I don't, frankly, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I find the notion of progress in music spurious. There is change, of course, but whether you can say that, you know, Alban Berg is per se better than Johann Bach, you know, than Bach. I mean, it's different. It's came later. It's got a thing of this, and it's got this, and that's the way I feel about it. But at that time there was somehow this division between squares and moldy figs and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and boppers and those who were hip, you know, and it was a terrible thing. All of a sudden, guys who would, you know, life is short, and in 20 years had gotten their art to a form of perfection. Guys like Bud Freeman or Buck Clayton or a Teddy Wilson or something. All of a sudden, they were sort of passé. You know, they're 40 years old and they're passé. You know, it's ridiculous. Ridiculous. What do they want from a guy? That he changes you know, changes colors every 5 years, which way the wind blows. All of a sudden you become a stand. You change from. So anyway,
was it mostly the non-musicians that started that? Was it the writers and the critics?
Many musicians felt, younger ones. Yeah, I think they had a lot to do with it. They fanned the flames. They saw good copy, divide, and you know, bebop versus. They even used to have those concerts at Birdland, the Moldy Figs. Here's Max Kaminsky and Edmund Hall and who else and whatever, and over here is our Diz and Bird or whatever it is, you know. And this is going to get people to come in, you know. It's sort of like that, trumped up like the boxing thing, you know, when they all start to, you know, I can knock them flat and all that stuff, you know, hokey kind of stuff. But no. I liked, when I say hot music to me was, I was especially fond, for some reason that I can't define, they would just latch on to certain things. I was especially fond of the Chicago guys, Joe Sullivan, Teschmacher, Bud, those guys, that whole school, Dave Tuff, Wetling, all those guys. I was very fond of them, and they were like the Falls. They were like, later on it occurred to me, they were the first really middle-class high school kids type guys who really embraced jazz as a group. Yeah. They and Bix and a few others. You know, otherwise jazz sort of came, if you pardon the expression, was sort of considered as coming from the wrong side of the tracks. You know, but that's not why. And then I always loved, of course, I always loved Fats, who I considered a hot player. These were hot players, you know. Herman Autry, who I later got a chance to play with, and guys like that. But I always thought Yes, my allegiance, just my physical type, the way I like hot music. I'm not necessarily that doesn't mean you hate the other stuff, but it's just not what really grabs you. You know, it's not the path you would choose to follow.
Now you, from telling me your schedule, are quite a globetrotter. I mean, this music has gotten you around to some different places. What is the European thing for this music? And
oh, well, listen, if I could have done when I was 25, 26, 7 years old, and I was working in a saloon in Chicago 6 nights a week for 5 years, and I said, I'm buried, I'm forgotten, they'll never know who I am, help, help, I'm drowning, and I would have gladly given a tow or allowed myself to be horsewhipped to go on the road, you know, to go places. Please, to go to England, to go to Japan, to go here, to go there, and the opportunity didn't really occur until I got to New York in '75, and back to New York, and then 3 months later, I'm with Dick Hyman doing a tour, you know, and stuff like that. And the point is that in America, jazz is dying on the vine largely. I mean, as far as it being a viable popular music, it's become an art music. It's not played hardly in saloons anymore. It's not played in dance halls. It's played on stages, concert stages. Right. And the thing about Europe is England has a lot of places where they like jazz, and Germany and France. And then Japan. We're going to Japan. I've been there about 4 times. Going again in next May, and Scandinavia, and stuff like that. And it's just they seem to think it's a big deal. They have work. They use it as I was telling you. They use it sort of as which is okay. They use it sort of as accompaniment to store features, and they have in Germany they have these department stores that they are allowed to take a certain deduction amount of their taxes. In fact, they're supposed to support the arts.
Wow!
This would be a great thing in this country, but try to get old Jesse, those guys convinced of it. Fat chance, and so sometimes they take it, and the townships. In Germany, this may be changing as the economics change, have like cultural programs that are subsidized. Like at the village theater, there will be like 1 week there'll be a ballet troupe, the next week a poetry reading, the next week a jazz group, next week a string quartet, that kind of thing. But it's subsidized. So when people book you over there for a tour, they often take advantage of that. And I went over there once with, we did some of those with Yank Lawson and Haggart and those guys, and did a bunch of those. And they treated us well. Young people came. It was like a cultural event, not just a jazz event where they say, well, you know, they're playing that old stuff. It's not rock. It ain't rock, so we're not interested. You know, it was like this is culture. It was just like next week they're doing Ibsen, and this week they're having American jazz musicians, and it's good for you. You know. Yeah. Sort of thing. Right. And the department stores subsidize tours. I know guys. I've done it myself. Go over and they finance the gigs by a band. You play for like a 2-hour concert after working hours, sort of, or on Thursday nights or something when they're open late, right in the middle of the store. Wow. Banks subsidize that and stuff. You know, it's sort of like goodwill and cultural. It's like when I do in Princeton once in a while. They have a Palmer Square in the middle of Princeton. They have like in the fall always a day where they weekend where they have stuff, you know, come down, shop downtown, see what we got, you know, this will get them downtown, they'll buy something, and they'll think which it is much nicer than the Miracle Mile outside of town with the Walmart, you know.
Yeah, right. When you're able to play with different people overseas, and who are some of your favorite musicians to play with? That's probably a big question. Are there certain
foreign musicians?
No, well, like, no, guys from here, but sometimes,
Oh,
like
I
you
like-
mentioned Dick Hyman and...
Yeah, there are. I was just over there, played some with Ralph Sutton. He's a fine player. I also did some things with the Summit reunion. You know, that I played with them 20 years ago.
Yeah.
DeVerne and Wilbur. They're fun to play with. Did the Bern Jazz Festival, did 5 concerts. They're good to play with. I mean, a lot of guys are good to play. I mean, if I went through the catalog, usually, of course, I try to bring the guys I work with. I like Greg.
Sure.
Greg Cohen's wonderful because he plays acoustic bass. He's one of the... New York has a couple of 2 or 3 unplugged bass players. I mean, really unplugged. They really play acoustic bass with gut strings. And it's like 50 years ago. It's wonderful because the souped up bass and acoustic guitar never really quite hit it off like totally acoustic. There's also a factor of resistance in the guitar when you have to work at it and do this. You know, when it's amplified, you have a little tiny pick, and you have a light action. The strings lie close to the fingerboard. You don't have to work, and you sort of go doop 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 doop, and it's sort of confidential. But when you but when you really have to slug the damn thing, it gives it a percussive dimension that the other one doesn't have. And same thing with bass. I used to watch. It must have been Milt Hinton. I remember Slam Stewart with Benny Goodman. I remember the Callaway Band around those years, 44, 45, so it must have been Milt. And I remember it seemed to me that by the second number, you know, they didn't have any amps in those days, and by the second tune, the band jacket was already getting sweated through, you know, but you felt that energy, that that you can't quite get through an amp.
You must have had some endurance.
Well, yeah.
You must have a lot of endurance,
you get well, you sacrifice something for it. Not that I ever had it. Listen, some of this, you know, we compensate for we also compensate for our shortcomings, and maybe rhythm guitar is an easy thing. It can't be heard too well. You know what I mean? And maybe when I was just a kid, trying to get it together, it was a good thing, a good instrument to be part of the group with, without ever really, you know, having to be put on the spot.
Yeah.
That could be a thing too.
Yeah.
I've thought about that as I review my life. I've thought about that.
Why did I pick this exact thing to do?
And then it's also like piano in the sense that your hands are always onto something. You know, the saxophone players, when they're not playing, they have to stand there and either look engaged or sometimes they look disengaged, or the trumpet players or others. But, you know, the rhythm sections always got something under the hands. And I remember when I was a kid, I used to have poison ivy a lot and stuff like that. And I'd be, you know, going like this. And my mother would say, don't scratch. Don't say, you'll spread it. And don't scratch. And there's nothing like a guitar or a piano, because it's like scratching. You're always doing this. Something's always happening, you know. You're always busy. You don't have to be bored. I always pity the poor guys. They have these long rests, and they sit there while some guy's taking a solo. They you know.
Yeah, a lot of downtime.
Yeah. But on the other hand, there can be miles and miles and miles of B flat. I remember doing a thing once in Nice, and they had it was Harry Edison and I can't remember now, Buddy Tate and probably Illinois Jacquette and Lockjaw and stuff. And anyway, Johnny Grenier, I remember, and it was the bassy. They were doing a bassy set, was supposed to be, you know, an hour long or an hour and 15 minutes like here, and it was bassy. They did 2 tunes. Wow. You know, what was one of them?
Probably one of them was a blues, right?
Probably, or Jumping at the Woodside or something, you know, and. Man, you know, after the first 25 minutes, you don't know what to do anymore. You know, it's boom, 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 boom. You know, the bass players are playing, they're going down, they're going up, they're going sideways. You know, you know, how many things? How much can you do with a B flat chord? I mean, you can bow. You know, you can play, but they're supposed to be playing just 4 notes.
Yeah.
You know?
But that whole
Yeah.
thing with the jam sessions,
Yeah.
the horn players, they can line up and
Yeah.
say their thing. I always
Yeah.
felt sorry for you guys in the rhythm section, because you had to keep going for everybody.
Yeah, you know, but that's the downside of
Yeah.
the picture, you know.
Right.
While these guys are on the ego trips, you're you know, one more. Yeah, you know. You're back there going chunk, 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 chunk for yards and yards and yards, you know.
Yards and
It's
yards.
like, but maybe it's a different kind of thing. It's like you can get a satisfaction from doing like shingling. You know, if you get into it, you keep nailing those shingles up. After a while, it gets to be kind of a pattern, a rhythm of your life. You know. You know.
That's a pretty good analogy. Let me just, before we wrap up, ask, where do you find these tunes? You
I
got
get
some
guys to
interesting
send me.
things?
I get guys to send me tapes.
Uh-huh.
And I buy those things downstairs. Like downstairs, they have those collections. Ethel Waters.
Yeah.
Bob Howard, Teddy Wilson. I'm just trying to think. You know those. I've heard all the, you know, not all, but a lot of the greats. The things you hear over and over again, you know, the great ones. And then you go looking for oddball stuff to play. And guys make up tapes of oddball things, cassettes of strange things. I have friends who send me stuff. It's wonderful. Tunes I never heard in my life, by groups I never heard.
Uh-huh.
You know, and mix it up. And you get ideas from that. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a wealth of material out there. It hasn't been plumbed. I mean, guys that's the problem, of course. We don't play together ever enough.
Right.
You used to play in a joint. You play 5 or 6 nights a week with the same guys. Man, if you could play 3 months, 4 months with the same guys, and then come to one of these festivals, you'd steamroller them.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody comes to these festivals. They're always saying, "What do you want to play?" Well, I don't know that one too well. Do you know this one? Well, I don't. How's the bridge go? Oh yeah. Oh, I don't know, and stuff. And finally, they always wind up playing Undecided or a riff on I Got Rhythm or you know, often the same kind of thing. And it's really, it would really be nice to have some group and do some of these things. That's where the vocals come in. Most of those songs a lot of those songs don't mean a hell of a lot without vocals. To John Q. Public out there.
Yeah.
It's a tune. You know, but what does it mean? And if you can have somebody to sing it, it gets a meaning. You know, nice tune, for example, that Ivy Anderson sang with Ellington and Wingy Manone sang it on records is "Isn't Love the Strangest Thing?" You know, pretty melody, everything like that. But I dare say it wouldn't mean much if you didn't have a vocal to sing with it. You know. Then they say, "Oh, gee, what a nice thought." You know, how romantic. Oh.
Well, even some of our best horn players that we've talked to have mentioned how they know the words when they play some of those songs.
Yeah.
You need to know the words whether they're being sung or not.
You need to know if you're
gentlemen.
if you're distorting it. I feel it's nice to know that you're doing violence to it. It's nice to know that you're painting a mustache on Mona Lisa when it's happening. You know what I mean? Because you can. One of the things that's often fun that Jimmy Lunsford and Red Nichols used to do was take fast tunes and play them slow, and slow tunes and play them fast. And you know, before Trummy Young came onto the scene, I think everybody played da 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 da. You know, it was one of those kind of tunes. And then he made kind of da da da, you know, a bouncy thing out of it, and that's fun. You know, if the tune lends itself to that.
Great.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think those songs there's a wealth of Tin Pan Alley stuff, piles and piles of it, undiscovered, lying in wait.
For our younger viewers, can you tell us what Tin Pan Alley means? Oh,
Tin Pan Alley was basically at first, I don't know, there are books on it. First it was someplace else, but it wound up being the Brill Building on Broadway in Midtown Manhattan, where guys Hi, young viewers. Tin Pan I was where guys named Sid and Maury worked on out-of-tune pianos in little cubicles, and smoked foul cigars, breathed on each other with foul cigars, and tried to get on top of the latest trend. When they had all those songs about, you know, if you don't like ham that melts in your mouth, if you don't like stay out of the South, and if you don't, you know, they had that whole thing about the people call him Loving Sam, the Sheik of Alabama. There's a whole thing, everything, all the songs are about the South. And as George S. Kaufman once said about the 20s, he said it was an era when all the Broadway sports got on the midnight choo-choo for Alabama at Penn Station and got off in Newark. you know, they'd never been south of Coney Island, these guys. You know, then when they wrote about Hawaii on the beach at Waikiki and all this stuff, they had a couple of postcards. You know, that's all.
They weren't exactly right from experience.
And then during the war, you know, Rose O'Day, you're my, you know, and Johnny Doughboy found a rose in Ireland. You know, and all that kind of stuff. These guys were still sitting up there pounding it out on their thing, you know, with the racing sheet in their back pocket, you know.
That's fascinating because later on the Brill Building became a home of some of the rock and roll writers too. You know.
Oh, really?
Carole King, Neil Sedaka, they worked there. Probably the same room. They probably still smelled like cigar smoke, you know.
Yeah. There's the only difference is now it's pot. You know?
Changed the music a little bit.
Yeah. I got an old-time guitar player friend who called me up not long ago, and his son is playing lead guitar for Rod Stewart in Europe for a year, and he makes this guy. You know, this guy, I suppose in his career, if he made $300 or $400 a week, it was a good week. His son makes $5,000 a week plus $140 a day for food, you know, and stuff. And he told me, he described the column speakers they had and everything.
Yeah.
And he said that the over 30 guys who go to listen to this music, audiences feel, if they don't feel a sort of, the sound system actually gives them kind of a constriction of the chest, then they want their money back. And he says the guys in the band there's no monitors anymore. They all use, I didn't know this, all use earphones because they're all getting deaf and hearing loss. And I'm wondering to myself, I mean, that's about as far removed from anything that I've ever gotten into. The closest I get are these deaf sound men you have to work with. You know, these cretins. You can imagine Carnegie Hall. They got a sound man. This is 20 years ago. They're doing, George Wein was doing a bunch of concerts, and I was standing waiting in the back, and there was a sound man, and he's got one of these work shirts on, and it says on the back Carnegie Hall. On the front it says his name, you know, Al, and he's working the soundboard, and they're doing a band up there, and the guy's playing an alto sax solo, and he's pushing the gain on the trombone. And I said, you know, that's an alto sax that's playing, not a trombone. Oh yeah, thanks a lot there. I mean, the artist's work is in the hands of these cretins, you know, or cretins. Depends whether you're in England, they call them cretins. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a shame.
I mean, this is like recording. This is like getting the Boston Symphony to record on one of those things you used to have in those booths you'd go in, you know, and send a message home to mom. Hi, Mom. You know. You know.
Yeah, I know. So I think the sound people have to justify themselves, you know. So they got to push things, you know, and even here sometimes. I sometimes feel like, I mean, sometimes things have to be amplified if you're playing a huge place, but sometimes I wonder, couldn't you hang a big mic over the band and pick up the band instead of
and leave it off?
You can leave it off.
They just fake mics.
Yeah.
We played the year, I think it was, we played in the executive suites across the road. They were putting people up for cheap or something.
Yeah.
So the guy here made a deal with them and stuff, and so we had to do like two or 3 hours thing over there, and the loyal fans trooped over to their bar area, their lounge, and the lounge had no piano. It never had any music. It was just some place where they piped in this stuff, you know, and then big TV screens so they could watch the testosterons playing the spirochetes, you know, in football or something, and they had that was off, and so there we were, and they'd forgotten to put a sound system in.
Mm-hmm.
It was absolutely acoustic. It was like 1930 when you played a job at a dance hall. There wasn't anything. Zilch. You had to have a megaphone to sing. And so we played, and they shut up, and it was probably the best job venue we ever played here, any place maybe. I don't know, because they were absolutely raptly obedient, quiet, and they understood what was happening, and they heard the instruments. Guys who'd spent quite a bit of time and effort in trying to develop good tones and good projection and stuff, and they really heard them working them the way it. And they like it. And every time Kenny DeVerne, for example, is a great non-mic man, and he sometimes gets, you know, turn them all off. And the sound man, you know, is taking hemlock back there, and I turn them all off, and he plays absolutely acoustic, and the audience usually loves it. Especially in these concert halls. They were built for Caruso. They were built for, you know.
Yeah. Great.
They're built for leader singers standing in the crook of the piano, you know.
Well, I'm going to assume that you're probably not going to be joining Rod Stewart within anytime soon, but
heaven forfend. Oh my God.
Oh God. We have really enjoyed talking with you today, and on behalf of Hamilton College, I'd like to thank Marty Grosz for joining us with the. You have a unique perspective on, in fact, you know, and it's reflected in what you do. You know, you're one of the few guys who plays acoustically, and
those things.
Ties.
No, those. No, I look upon it. I don't look upon it as anything else. If I can just do one thing, I look upon it as an entertainment. And I wish that, to make one closing statement, I wish that people would dance to the music again. The best jobs I ever had in my life were dance gigs. And I don't mean that because it's a lost thing and nobody's doing it anymore, and so I hark back to it and there was, but I mean they were really fun because you could really play unself-consciously. You just, as long as they didn't pay any attention to you, you served a purpose. You got them on the floor and got them milling about and everything like that, and jumping to the music. And then that was when I heard piano players and stuff play so freely and so strangely and so inspiredly, because they didn't have to rely upon hitting home runs. What you do, jazz is becoming a concert stage music, and guys hit home runs. They play high notes. They do drum solos that go on forever and ever, and these surefire devices, just like concert artists do with their cadenzas and their bravura performances and stuff. And that didn't used to be. That you used to play in little joints in saloons or in little dance places and just play unself-consciously, and that was the most fun of all. And if you could have a few laughs doing it, entertain a little bit, great. And if the music happened to work as well and be good, that was I always felt was a bonus. You know, first thing was just to hear the melody and have a good beat, and then if it got going and if somebody really started improvising, but it was done without a thought to the audience. I gotta get him, I gotta kill him. You know, this guy took 3 choruses, I gotta take 4 choruses because I gotta top him. It wasn't that kind of feel. It was just keep the thing going and play something interesting. You know.
Some good thoughts, and I'm going to have to go listen to you tonight and see if that happens.
Well, then the whole thing will come crashing apart. It'll be like the Hindenburg.
I don't know. I see it. Next CD maybe there's a title there for you, the Hindenburg or something. But I'm not sure you can. Is this your latest?
No.
Okay.
Done several since. I turn them out like kielbasa's.
Okay.
You know, I mean, you go to England and Germany. They want something new. Anything new? Anything new? Oh gosh, we got that one. You know.
But songs I learned at my mother's knee and other low joints is is the title that we started off with in your mother's comment, which is really memorable. So thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Isn't love the strangest thing? Isn't love the strangest thing? Isn't love the strangest